is in you. All my hope is in you.
Them gave them these great names, pleasing, and in this case, be pleasing to God, and Elimilech, my God, is king. There's a clear announcement of faithfulness that starts this story. You start off with husband and wife who are chosen children of God in the promised land. Somewhere this goes astray. We see it in the actions, but we also see it in the name of their children that start off. Their names of the children are Mahlon and Chilion. They're kind of strange names, but it gets worse when you actually know what they mean. Mahlon means sickness. Chilion means pining or wasting. Terrible names. But even worse, because in the Bible, the meaning of the names often are put in place for people to understand what's going on in the story. They've got meaning to them. We don't know whether Mahlon and Chilion came out of the womb looking sickly, or looking like they're pining, looking like they're wasting away, or God put it on Elimelech and Naomi's hearts to name them these terrible names because of what was going to happen in their lives. We see somewhere they go from my God is king and pleasing to sickly and pining. It's going to tell us what's going to happen in this account later in the account, because they go from following God to feeling the effects of sin. Satan always wants to steal, kill, and destroy. And here he's going to take their family and steal, kill, and destroy them. This is a great lesson for parents and for prospective parents, or really anybody who's trying to be an effective disciple and lead other people in Christ. Elimelech and Naomi, their relationship with the Lord at some point falls apart. It falls apart and they lose faith in the deliverer God, in the redeeming God. And they turn away from that God and go into Moab. The problem with that is for them, it's bad. You can compromise is bad for us. It eats away at us. But it gets even worse for the next generation, because they see our compromise, they see our lack of faith, and that burrows into them. And sin just metastasizes. It just gets worse. So you go from outwardly following God, Elimelech, my God is king, to just the entire person is sickly and pining. It's an ugly picture of what sin does to us in this world. It takes us. Sin is never satisfied with just one person. The next generation gets worse, and the next generation gets worse after that. It's just not satisfied, hidden away in us. So that's the first just idea. If there's any sin in us, realize that it's not going to stop with just us. It'll take our children and then their children. And if someone doesn't step up and say, I'm not going to do this anymore, I will follow God. My God is king truly in my spirit, then it'll just keep going and going, and next generation after that. There's significance in Moab too. It's not just that they chose this land, because you see both the path of the Israelites in their choice, and then just the path of sin in their choice. Moab, God calls Moab his toilet in the Bible, in the Psalms, his wash basin. Moab was where the refuse got dumped. It is not looked kindly upon by God. The promised land is where the Israelites should have been and should have always stayed. They were supposed to stay there. But because they don't understand God's plan, they start looking to the world to solve their problems. The world can never solve a problem which is caused by their spiritual rebellion. But if they don't want to submit, then Moab starts looking good. For us, if we're walking with God and we're struggling with something, we start looking out at the world and say, well, maybe I need to work out. or maybe I need to lose some weight, or maybe I need to do this or with that, or maybe I'm just not having the fun that I should, and I should compromise my values. Because what's so wrong about doing that? We're looking at Moab, what could never solve our problem, rather than just simply submitting to God and keeping our eyes on Jesus and asking Him to solve our problem. The Israelites start off in here, a little picture of what Israel does. My God is king. Then something bad happens because of their own rebellion, and they start looking at going after the world to make the world solve their problems. Moab is also significant because way back in Genesis chapter 19, it's really important why Moab came about. Moab was founded by the grandson of Lot, and it is right after Sodom and Gomorrah that Moab, the grandson, is conceived. If you remember Sodom and Gomorrah, remember Lot is there because he has chosen, back with Abraham, he chose the plain that looked good to his eyes, never asked God, settled there, and Sodom and Gomorrah rose up around him and was a horrible place, filled with sin and rebellion. God sends his angels into Sodom and Gomorrah to rescue Lot, and they're brought out. And immediately afterwards, this compromise takes place. Lot comes out, his wife comes out, his two daughters come out. Remember, wife turns around, turns to salt. So the two daughters are left. They don't understand God's plan. They don't understand the mercy that they just received from God. And they're evidently not very grateful for it, because they start worrying about, oh, God just saved me. God just destroyed the city. God is in control, but I need to make sure that I have a husband and that I have children. In Genesis chapter 19, it says that Lot was dwelling in Zoar, and he and his daughters dwelt in a cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on earth to come in to us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger also arose, and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborns bore a son, and called his name Moab. Moab is the father of the country of Moab, the Moabites. So what happens there? They don't trust God. God has just delivered them. God has just saved them. God has shown His great power. And immediately when there is a lull after that, they start worrying about what God is going to take care of. We need this, we need that. God will not help us. So you see, going into Moab is exactly the same thing that started Moab to begin with. They didn't trust God. They didn't follow God. They didn't believe that God, who had just delivered them, was going to provide for them for the future. God puts this in the Bible for a reason. So we see how Moab is just a picture of, from the beginning, not trusting God and turning to our own self-sufficiency and our own plans rather than trusting in God's deliverance. So Elimilech starts off with a terrible idea. Rather than turn to God, let's go into this foreign land that God calls his wash basin, and they will provide what we need. Then verse 3 says, Then Elimilech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. So Elimilech, rather than turn back, he's there for an extensive period of time, he stays, and he continues to stay away from God. This is a picture, even in the New Testament, you have when Jesus talks about the parable of the prodigal son. We focus on the returning part, but the younger brother does exactly what Elimilech does here. We focus on the prodigal son returning, but when he leaves, he is the father, and that is the picture of God. And the 2 sons are the picture of us and our different sorts of rebellion. The older son stays, and he's still in rebellion because he doesn't listen to the father, he doesn't love the father, he's got no relationship with the father. But the younger son looks around at all the father has and all the father is willing to give him, and says, that is not enough. I don't trust you, Father, to provide what I need. This land is worthless to me. And he takes off and he goes into a far country, looking for satisfaction in different things other than the Father and all that he provides. Elimilech does the very same thing. The sons do the very same thing. And since sin has consequences, Elimilech feels those consequences and dies without ever being able to return to his God. It's a terrible, tragic story to begin with, but then it gets worse. His 2 sons double down. They reinforce his decisions, and they take wives of the women of Moab. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but again, Moab is, the whole country was conceived in rebellion to God, in scheming, in man's self-sufficiency, and they are not part of the children of God. Anyone who married a woman of Moab and their children was barred from participating in the activities of the temple, of the tribe of Israel for generations. The father experienced consequences from his decisions. When he dies, you would think that Mahlon and Chilion would stop and say, what are we doing? But they continue going. The next thing, that just give me the next thing. Maybe if I get married, the world will satisfy my desires. They don't realize that it's only God that can really satisfy that desire, who can really fix things. He is allowing this discipline during this time because it's only through turning back to him and turning back to the promised land, the spirit-filled life, that true joy and true happiness can take place. So then, their names are Orpah and Ruth, based on the book is named. And they dwelt about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. This is the result of terrible decisions on the part of Elimilech, Naomi, and the 2 sons. They have turned against God, and they're feeling the consequences. Now, God is merciful, and God is just, and God would welcome them back like the father from the parable of the prodigal son at any moment. So it's not him punishing them. They have chosen sin. They have chosen the far-off country. They've chosen the world. And when we do that, we get consequences. But the awesome thing is, this book is all about redemption. This book is all about God offering healing to people who don't deserve it. The sad part is, in order for there to be redemption and mercy and grace, the people first have to do things that require mercy and require grace and require redemption. And the men of this family have done that in spades. They've chosen to leave the promised land. They've chosen to disobey God. They've chosen rebellion. And then they chose to out and out disregard what God wanted. And they're suffering the consequences. The sad part is you now have Naomi, the mom and wife, and the two daughters who are totally lost, who are totally in really big trouble. In the ancient world, there was no safety net. There was some protections in Israel, but remember, they left Israel. Naomi could have gotten back to her family in Israel. The extended family would take care of widows. There is protection in the law for widows, but they're in Moab with people they don't know, and they've lost any hope of sustenance. There just was no jobs for ladies way back then. So a widow was dependent on charity, or often would turn to terrible things to make money, to survive. This is the result of a seemingly little thing. Remember, Elimilech, my God is king. The king has everything under control. But Elimilech says, there's a way that seems right to me. I'll just go into there for a little while. I'll go into Moab. I don't trust you, God. And that little thing leads to destruction for his family. But before we go any further, it's important to know that redemption is coming. Redemption is calling to Naomi and to Orpah and to Ruth, and likely to Mahlon and Chilion and Elimilech before they died. We're going to see that while they're in this far-off country, by all accounts, God could have just left them there. God could have said, all right, you made your choice. You made your bed, now sleep in it. But he didn't. They're going to hear that there is grain in the land. There is food. The famine is over. And they're going to head back. Have we thought about that if we've read the Book of Ruth before? The family of Elimilech makes bad decisions. They rebel against God. They run away from God, like the prodigal son. But God sends messengers somehow to get to them, to hear that there is a house, there is bread in the land. Elimilech and family are from Bethlehem. The name Bethlehem means house of bread. Israel was the land of milk and honey. Israel and the house of bread is supposed to be where they're eating and rejoicing, because it is the time of judges, because it's the time where each person did what was right in their own eyes. They're self-sufficient and they're sinful. There's no bread and there's no milk and honey. The answer to that is always turning back to God, being obedient, listening to him, and fixing that relationship so that the milk and honey start flowing again, so that there is bread in the house of bread. In some ways, the Book of Ruth is a little picture of the gospel of Jesus, in that the men and women in the story, in the account, are generally unfaithful. They turn against God. They are rebellious and they do whatever they want to do. And as a result, they get in big trouble. They're facing consequences. They are facing death. And there's nothing they can do about it. But, which is us in life, dealing with our sin. When we go against God and we are self-sufficient and we are rebellious and we do not follow after his ways, we're always going to lead ourselves astray. And we face death. We face physical death, but we face spiritual death. We are dead in our sin and trespasses. But God sends messengers. The news of bread, of redemption, of a new life comes to Naomi and to Ruth and Orpah, even though they're in a far-off land, even though they have led themselves astray. God calls people back to him. In our life, it's through Jesus. He calls, the entire world was against him. They were enemies in sin and trespasses. And he calls and says, come back to the land of milk and honey. Come back to redemption. I will heal you and give you a new life in Bethlehem, the house of bread. So I hope you enjoyed the study. It's a wonderful book. It's just filled with messages from the Lord about redemption and faithfulness, and even just Ruth, how her simple faith and kindness leads back to God.